Silent Hill 4, The Room, is as far from the original Silent Hill formula as you can stray without completely missing the point and shitting the proverbial bed. Originally devised as a side game, The Room served as a final spurt of creative jizz instead. The series' original developers and hallmarks are present, but without the constraints of maintaining the established lore, or the boredom of exploring the same locations for a fourth goddamned time weighing it down. Instead, players explore a series of completely original, compartmentalized areas as Henry Townshend, a hopeless NEET who chains up his door like the first hipster gentrifying a black neighborhood and has absolutely zero connection or reaction to the events unfolding around him. In this, Silent Hill and Frank Edition, you'll explore not only the existential dread of realizing you're just a bit player in someone else's nightmare, but also the tangible terror of being tracked by a troop of furious Tiger Wood clones and the unspeakable horror of Section 8 housing. For the first half of the game, returning to Henry's apartment allows the player to refill their health, check out some festive hand turkey art, and spy on the girl next door, Eileen, whose name is fitting, since I lean forward to obscure my pulsating pantaloon pike whenever I watch her surreptitiously. However, as the game progresses, you'll dread returning home more than a young Michael Jackson after missing a note during rehearsal, as the apartment is eventually invaded by more furious spooks than a South African farm. These otherworldly abominations include spectral Mexicans who have evolved to phase through walls rather than climbing over, tunneling under, or weed-whacking through them. A chair sat on by the ghost of Freddie Mercury after an especially moist shart, and some half-eaten Chinese takeout. The first area Henry explores after finding a hole in his bathroom wall that allows him to recreate the experience of a sperm flying through a piss tube towards an iPad is a grimy subway station inhabited by umbilical cord-tongued dogs, invincible ghosts that can flip their fists inside of you like an especially friendly drunkle, as well as a stunning recreation of my penis that is so accurate I immediately checked my bathroom and neighbor's azalea bushes for hidden cameras after seeing it. There, in the metaphorical dookie hole of a bustling city, Henry encounters Cynthia Velasquez, or as I prefer to call her, Jennifer Lower My Sperm Count Pez. This salacious swallower of seminal soup is so sensually seductive that I'd raw dog her anchor-dropping cooch on the northern Mexican border and utilize the projectile power of my pulsating penile pistole to propel her back to the godless country of refried beans and refried dreams, where she and the baby I will never acknowledge belong. To that end, Cynthia mistakes her descent into the other world for a wet dream after catching a hint of rotting fish in the air, and offers oral treats to Henry if he will be so kind as to escort her to the nearest shitter. Which is notable, as this is the first time, as far as I know, where a game's escort mission involves chaperoning an actual dick lick for a quick tip escort. Unfortunately, the destructive combination of eldritchian horror and a tum-tum filled with chipotle proved too much for Cynthia to contain, and she took a shit so massive that nothing of her remained, save for a hollowed-out husk with bloody hands. Before exiting the level, Henry encounters Cynthia one last time and finds her suffering the most ironic fate of all, a Mexican dying of knife wounds. Henry awakes in his room from what he believes at first to have been a nightmare, to find an ambulance wailing by the subway entrance beyond his window, and a radio host describing the details of Cynthia's demise. At this point, notes begin to appear beneath Henry's front door, indicating the involvement of Walter Sullivan, a long-dead ritualistic murderer who was so obsessed with Henry's apartment that he thought it was his mother and chipped his front teeth while trying to suckle from the front doorknob. Upon returning to his bathroom, he finds that the hole in the wall has dilated like a speedrunner between tapings at a Games Done Quick convention, and now leads to a poorly constructed forest level where pubic lice fly into his face as if he was eating pussy on a hot summer's day. Rectangular sections of a forest that are completely interchangeable, and eventually waste 20 minutes of his life completing an elaborate fetch quest that could have been completely avoided by pushing a wheelchair downhill with the tip of his penis as we all do from time to time. There, in the shadows of a tremendous petrified cat turd, Henry encounters a stuttering moron whose head makes a hollow clinking sound when you whack it with a lead pipe, chugs chocolate milk as if it was a cure for Forrest Gump syndrome, and holds the key to a building called the Wish House, or, as the orphans who inhabited the place refer to it, the "I wish they would stop putting their fingers in my butthole every time I bend down to tie my shoes" house. Upon clearing this area, Henry finds that his new friend Jasper's excess chromosomes have accidentally rubbed together until igniting, and the level ends. At this point, other characters begin to take an interest in Henry's absence and the strange sounds coming from his room. However, they assume he's just beating off to anime too much, neglect to call the police, and the nightmare continues. Finding the hole in his wall even larger, Henry enters it to find himself in an impressive prison for children that frankly makes me rethink my own current layout and plans for expansion. There he encounters two-headed babies that require dual-wielded coat hangers to dispatch, and point at you like all those little tattletale liars that promise never to tell a soul what happened out of fear of you strangling their parents and cat, but suddenly got brave the moment a policeman with a hand puppet came near, as well as some overgrown sperms and more useless leeches than the German welfare system. Within the darkest recesses of this abominable dungeon, Henry encounters Andrew, an unlikable prick who gets off on torturing children and is missed by no one when he dies 10 minutes later. At this point in the game, another character comes into prominence, an adorable boy who seems at first ripe for a Hollywood producer of repressed childhood memories to prey upon. However, this younger version of the primary antagonist is about as on the nose as possible, and when he electrocutes, with an emphasis on the cute, Richard Braintree to death in the next area, no one will really be surprised. The only real standout moments for this underage Chris Chan cosplayer are when Henry gives up trying to save the boy from being carried off by his older self after taking about 3 half-hearted steps, and when the booger eater finally receives the late-term abortion that everyone else wanted for him from the start. In the next 2 areas, Henry explores a haunted version of the area directly outside of his own apartment complex, which is inhabited, for no particular reason, by monkeys, then a twisted version of the interior where the walls are constructed from raw ground beef. At this point, any normal person would be screaming, "You're tearing me apart, Lisa!" But Henry's Asperger's prevents him from displaying even a modicum of emotion, and he continues as usual. Upon returning to his apartment, 2 troubling events occur. First, the ceiling fan in his living room breaks, signaling the end of his free health refills and ability to cash in on his damage deposit, as well as the beginning of the half-assed haunting mechanic that can completely fuck you over if you return from a lengthy segment and fail to exercise a haunting because you placed your last holy candle 1 millimeter too far to the left or right. The next problem occurs next door. Apparently, while Henry was gone, the adult form of Walter broke into Eileen's room and caused the rest of her body to become almost as beat up as her pussy. On the bright side, if you think she's cute and want her number, you can just read it off of her back. At this point, things begin to fall apart. Having squeezed into it 1 too many times, the hole in Henry's bathroom has become so big and loose that he is forced to go around back and jam it in from behind. Upon exiting this new hole, Henry finds himself in a hospital populated by a deadly combination of leather-faced trannies with barely adequate buttock cheeks and invisible cribbles. After asking for a little head and finding out that Eileen is a contrarian bitch, Henry is joined by this delicious dollop of trollop on his never-ending quest to leave his room. Eileen's main additions to the game include her ability to decipher the arcane notes left behind by the antagonist, her tendency to run directly into enemies, permanently damaging herself and locking you out of a good ending, and gradually becoming possessed by her own ticking biological clock. After leaving the hospital, she and Henry spiral down a metaphysical staircase, one recycled area at a time, while a parallel universe version of Kurt Cobain, who finally learned how to turn the gun away from his face before shooting, chases them. Most players get a little pissy at this point, because as Henry and Eileen run through reused areas, they'll also have to outrun the ghosts of the people Henry failed to save. This hairy slut flops around on the floor like the fish her pussy smells of, this half-naked fatty rubs his big protruding nipples in your face before E-Honda flying headbutting you from off screen, but they all go down like a fat girl on prom night. After Henry equips his best anti-ghost Sonichu medallion, he can slap the ghosts around until they're just too tuckered out to stop him from penetrating them from behind. Also, for no immediately apparent reason, there's some dolls sticking out of wall-mounted buttholes for a boss. After clearing this victory lap of previously beaten areas, our heroes are confronted by an upside-down black man with some of the worst voice acting I've heard in years, who spells out parts of the plot that anybody with the mental faculties necessary to stop themselves from strangling their newborn, normal siblings should have already figured out hours ago. Eileen then decides her planet needs her and vanishes until the very last area of the game, where Henry confronts a metaphysical manifestation of Walter's desire to return to his mother's beat-up pussy that looks like it walked through a bunch of cobwebs. Having been completely possessed by Walter's rituals, Eileen slowly walks towards her own demise and the destruction of the world as we know it, like some unintentional anthropomorphization of feminism, and if you don't act quickly to destroy the final boss with an umbilical cord and some club sandwich picks, a set of bad endings and a steaming hot sluice of screaming thought juice is your reward. Gameplay-wise, Silent Hill 4 is passable despite some odd choices. At times, you cannot proceed until you return to your apartment to inspect a drawer you have no reason to look at, or retrieve a bottle of chocolate milk from the fridge. And while these problems are easily overlooked, I wish new players the best of luck figuring out that there's one fridge in the entire apartment complex that they'll have to inspect 3 times in order to read a note that spawns the key under Henry's bed in the real world without looking it up online. In terms of combat, our hikikomori pal Henry can either smack enemies around with quick attacks or charge up his indifference for maximum damage. Weapons are literally everywhere, and often you'll pick up a weapon 5 rooms away from a clearly superior replacement. However, certain weapons break after a couple of swings and cannot be dropped from the limited inventory until you return to your apartment. As a result, Henry's collection of golf clubs quickly become useless scrap metal, his bottle of Chablis becomes a dapper African-American gentleman's knife, and he'll rarely have enough room for his Puerto Rican credit card plus ammo. In his room, Henry always has something new to observe outside of his windows, through his peepholes, or simply from inspecting his belongings. Overall, Silent Hill 4 is a flawed but genuinely great game that proves Silent Hill could change without losing its identity. Unfortunately, not everyone at Konami got the memo.